Today I'd like to show you how KNIME can be used to run market simulations. To show you, we put together this 5-part series on the economic history of the beer industry and the rise of the microbrew. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to Scientific Strategy. Scientific Strategy is a trusted partner that provides market simulation nodes running on top of the KNIME Analytics platform. Scientific Strategy's logo looks like this. It is the invisible hand, or the invisible robotic hand, of the market. Today, in part 1, we're looking at the early local manufacturing phase of the beer industry. We're going to be looking at the economic history of beer just in the USA. We're going to quantify a type of product differentiation called Geographic Differentiation, and we're going to provide a KNIME example workflow. To start off, I'd like to get you thinking about what kind of beer this is. Chances are it's a lager, just like 98.2% of beer sold in the USA. And when researchers ask consumers about these beers and do blind taste tests, they discover that 90% of all consumers cannot tell one conventional lager from another. Which begs the question, is beer a commodity? And in that sense, it really is. If consumers can't tell the products apart, then beer should be very aggressively priced and very cheap. But in fact, the beer industry has been very profitable. Margins have been very healthy. So this economic analysis tries to address that question. Why is a product that looks like a commodity so profitable? Now, stepping back and looking how industry life cycles should flow, it looks something like this. This is the number of auto companies, and we have two charts here, the number of suppliers and the number of automakers. And we can see that industries should follow this kind of example, where there's an introduction phase, a growth phase, a maturity phase, consolidation, and maybe decline. The beer industry was following something very similar, where starting back in 1810, when records were being kept, we see a rapid rise in the number of breweries, followed by a long decline. Now, there is a bump at around 1930. What happened? Well, for those folks that have seen The Untouchables, the movie, you'd know that this was Prohibition. Starting with the 18th Amendment in 1920, ending with the 21st Amendment in 1933, Prohibition prohibited the sale of beer in the United States. So what does Prohibition teach us about markets? Well, if you join those dots together, you can see that the industry itself, the dynamics that were driving the industry, really were not impacted by Prohibition at all. It's like the whole event didn't exist. The curve, the number of breweries just continued to decline as predicted. So in that sense, you could really say that markets is another type of math. Markets can be analyzed using mathematics just like any other industry or just like any other discipline. Now, what happened in 1980? In 1980, a very famous Harvard Business School professor called Michael Porter wrote an influential book called Competitive Advantage. And in that book, he wrote, "The opportunities for small players are so limited that the brewing industry exemplifies barriers to entry." So you can see in 1980 there were only 101 registered breweries. In fact, the reality was much worse. There were really only 4 breweries that produced and sold beer for consumption. And those were Budweiser, Miller, Coors, and what is now called Pabst. So was Michael Porter right? In fact, no. Shortly after he wrote that book, the microbrew industry exploded in the market. And the number of breweries today, more than there ever has been. So why is this? Michael Porter projected that a new brewery could never enter this market. To do so, they'd have to have the economies of scale of a Budweiser and the brand power of a Miller. And yet, all these breweries, without any of those advantages, somehow were able to enter this market and compete profitably. So in this 5-part series, we're going to look at the economic history of beer at each phase. Phase 1 is going to be the local manufacturing of beer back in the 1800s. Then phase 2 is national distribution, growth and consolidation, mass marketing, and finally the introduction of the microbrew. And we'll be seeing that the beer industry really reinvented itself 5 times throughout its history. In this part 1, we're looking at local manufacturing. We can see that in the year 1660, New Amsterdam, or today New York, had 26 breweries and taverns. And George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both brewed their own beer. So of these local breweries, what was their biggest source of market power? How did all these hundreds and thousands of breweries exist and profitably compete against one another? And the answer is that each had its own local monopoly. Let's look at how that works. So these breweries were set up town by town. We can see this example in the small town of Pittsburgh. There was a brewery, and outside of that brewery was a road running past all the farms. Consumer A lived closest to the brewery. Down the road you found consumer C. Down the road further was consumer F. So which of these consumers valued the Pittsburgh beer the most? And the answer is, all else being equal, customer A. They were local. It was easy for them to walk into town and enjoy a beer. So this kind of feature of the product was it was known as geographic differentiation. The products themselves were geographically differentiated as far as each of the consumers were concerned. Some consumers felt that the product was very close. Other consumers saw the product as being too far away. And value of these products was really proportional to location. Let's try and bring a little bit of math around this and plot this. And this is a simplification, but it's going to look something like this. So we have the Pittsburgh Brewing Company and the willingness to pay of consumers going down that road. So the distance from product 1 is along the horizontal axis, willingness to pay is along the vertical axis. Customer A, who lives nearby the brewing company, has a very high willingness to pay. And as you go down that road, past B, past C, D, E, and F, the customer's willingness to pay decreases as the distance into town increases. Now let's imagine a second brewery, the Great Lakes Brewing Company, that might be at the other end of that road, located right next to customer F. And in this case, we're looking at the willingness to pay customers have for this second product. So F has a very high willingness to pay because they live next door to this Great Lakes Brewing Company. And then going back up the road, we pass customer E, D, C, B, and finally A, who lives very far away from this Great Lakes Brewing Company. So A has a very low willingness to pay in this case. So which product out of these two has market power? And the answer is both of them do. They both essentially have monopolies over the consumers that live near the breweries. So Pittsburgh has a monopoly over customer A and B. Great Lakes has a monopoly over customers E and F. And it's really only customers C and D who have a competitive choice if they could be bothered going into either town. Now there's a market simulation built into KNIME that we're using as an example. And it could look something like this. You can see the market simulation nodes. Once you install it into KNIME, they will appear on the left-hand side of the node repository. These are the free community nodes. And you can see the new nodes that we've dragged out into the workspace and how we're recreating this market simulation for the local monopoly of the beer industry. And if you'd like to download and follow along online, there's a link at the bottom. Let's now switch to KNIME and see how this market could be simulated using the new market simulation nodes by scientific strategy. Here are the market nodes here, the scientific strategy branch, and we open them so in the market simulation. And these are all the nodes, the new nodes that have been provided. There's a bit more nodes being provided all the time. In this workflow, we can see a few of the new nodes. Customer distributions is a new node. Product generator is a new one, and profit engine is a new one. So let's open this up and look at the details. Now, what we're trying to do here, I'll open this first. So this is a table creator. We're going to see how these products are defined. So product 1 has two features: beer, which is an undifferentiated quality, and geography 1, which is our geographic differentiation. Product 2 is the same. It comprises of beer, but it's located down the other end of the road, so it has geographic differentiation geography 2. Now we add these up to make product 1 and product 2. Now let's look at the underlying customer distributions. Remember, we had customers A to F. In the market simulation, they're going to be 10,000 customers here. So we say number of customers here, 10,000. And this is beer. Now this is something we didn't describe in the presentation, but the willingness to pay for beer is going to be normally distributed. And we're going to have a mean value, parameter A is the mean, of $2, or 2 utils if you prefer, with a standard deviation of 0.2. So we run this and we see that's our customer distribution with our customers 1, 2, 3, 4 down to 10,000. And each has a different value for beer, the taste of beer. Some really love the taste of beer, some hate it. Let's see if we can find any low value ones. 2.2, a lot of people like it. Here we go, this is relatively low, 1.7. So that's the beer. Now geography, remember, some customers live near town 1 and some customers live near town 2. So what we do is create 2 more distributions for the customer lost value for the distance traveled. So every step you take, the beer is less and less attractive. So here we go. This is going to be an ordered distribution. So imagine all the customers lined up down the road. For the nearest customers, that's going to be a 0 lost value because they live right next door. So it's effortless to go next door. Those customers that live a long way away, it's going to be a minus $2 or minus 2 utils if you prefer. So you can see that the geography, the pain, the lost value decreases, increases the further away you get from the town. So that's geography 1, and then you look at the other product coming back up the road from the second town. It starts off for the customers near the first town. That's a long way to walk to the second town, so they have a very high loss value, and then customers that live next to the second town have no loss value. Okay, now don't get too hung up. You're probably wondering how these values, where I got these values. There's a whole another set of capabilities for tuning these market simulations, so the tuned market simulation matches the real world. We're not really addressing that in this series. We're just looking at concepts, how to describe different types of market simulation. Right, we run this description through another customer distributions node, and we get 2 more distributions over here. All right. So geography 1 and geography 2. So customer number 1 lives right next door to the brewery. Fantastic, no loss value, and then the loss value increases for all these customers along the road. And vice versa for geography number 2. Customer number 1 lives a long way from the second product, But as you walk down the road, customers get cheaper and cheaper, right? Until you get all the way down, and we get the opposite situation. Customer number 10,000 doesn't want to travel to town 1. They prefer to travel to town 2 because there's zero loss value there. All right, so we penned all those now 3 customer distributions together. Beer, geography 1 and geography 2. Right, so this is the part worth distributions, part worth value for each of our customers, 1 through to 10,000. And then we join these together using, this is from, we saw this already. Product number 1 is beer plus geography number 1. Product number 2 is beer plus geography number 2. Remember, beer is undifferentiated. And here's some prices. So they're both priced the same and they both cost the same. Now when we run this market simulation, we see the output product array. And we see product 1, product 2, both enjoying selling a lot at a high price relative to the cost, and both very profitable. Right? They both have local monopolies. And we can illustrate that, actually, we can illustrate that by looking at the second product. So here we change the price. We increase the price of product 1 a lot, and we decrease the price of product 2 a lot. Remember, these are commodity products, just separated by geography. And let's see what happens. And we run this profit engine again to simulate the market. And all right, product number 1, much higher price compared to product number 2, but still sells a lot. And product 2 sells a higher quantity, but let's see, product 2's profitability is actually lower. So both products are still very, very profitable. Raising price is actually a good strategy. And we can see that if we bounce back to this market simulation node, the profit engine, we've got some charts built in here. This is a demand curve chart, and we can see here this is our profit curve, and blue is our quantity curve. So this is our current price, $1, and this is our market share at $1, 50%, and our profitability at $1. And the software is saying, or predicting, that we should raise price to $1.28. That's our profit maximizing price. If we do that, we're going to lift profitability by 16%. So it's going to go from 100% to 116%. We are going to lose some customers. We're going to go from 49.950% down to 41%. So we do lose some customers, but this is a profit maximizing strategy for us. Now, one more thing I wanted to show you. If we look at the net willingness to pay of both these products, so these are the summed willingness to pay, the sum of the part worth for product 1 and product 2 for all the customers. If we look at that in a histogram, or sorry, a line chart, it's going to look like this, right? So remember from our presentation, this was our crossover chart. So these are our customers along the bottom, the 10,000 customers. Customer number 1, who lives right next to product A, first product, first town, can have a very high value. Now we have a lot of noise here because individual customers differ in the value they place on the beer, but the geographic differentiation declines. Right? We can actually do more with that chart, that curve, to make it more realistic, but the decline is very steady. And for the red curve, this is for the willingness to pay customers have for the product number 2 in the second town. That increases as you get closer and closer to that product. So that was the end of part 1. We're looking at geographic differentiation, and we used a KNIME workflow with the new market simulation nodes by Scientific Strategy. In part 2, we're going to continue this, and we're going to look at the end of geographic differentiation and national distribution. We have another KNIME workflow in that, using more of the nodes that we've introduced.